My Family Thinks I'm Crazy, a podcast where I, your host, try to give you some tips on how you can explain all this weird, wild, crazy conspiracy stuff to the people you love most. Because that's what I've been trying to do for the past 10 years with no success.
I've been telling everybody that our government is shady, but every time I do, my family thinks I'm crazy. The hollow earth, UFOs, aliens invading, fluoride in the water, they swear skies daily. When I talk about these things, they think I'm crazy. There's no escaping anymore the evil that we're facing. Illuminati mind control, they're sacrificing babies. The end of days, but anyways, my family thinks I'm crazy.
What, they don't want to listen to you?
No, they don't want to listen. They don't want to hear it. They're just like, oh, here we go, Mark. Off again with your...
Mark being Mark again.
Yeah. So, that's the thing about podcasts is when you're on the air, it's like therapy, If I can't talk to my family about this stuff, I'll talk to you, Matt, and all our listeners.
You'll just start your whole podcast.
Yeah. So who are we talking about today, Matt?
They think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. They really think that I'm crazy. My family thinks that I'm crazy.
So, I'm a nomad. I'm in a very fortunate position because my life right now is the complete opposite of your podcast title. My whole family's awake. Literally, everyone, like my sister might be the most awake. I'm in the fortunate position where my immediate family, I don't have to convince them of anything. GMOs, 9/11 inside job, Area 51, fake news, chemtrails, they're just like, yeah, that makes sense. JFK assassination, Illuminati, false flags, they're just like, yeah, that makes sense. RFID chip, moon landing faked, rigged elections, crisis act. Yeah, that makes sense. Predictive programming, secret societies, FEMA camps, CERN, Big Six control media. That makes sense. 2030 UN agenda. The Clintons are murderer. MK Ultra. Bohemian Grove. Yeah, makes sense. Aliens are demons. Rothschilds. Black Pope. Jesuit order. Blood sacrifices. I don't have to convince them of anything. If I were going to put money on which one I think it is, mental gymnastics. That's level 1. Freemasonry. Then level 3 is conspiracy theorists.
I bought a t-shirt that said conspiracy analyst on it, and I thought that was cool until I realized it also said conspiracy anal on it.
Yeah. I was having like the jab debate with people in Canada. If you didn't know, I ran away. So I'm a nomad. I'm pretty hardcore.
I know Canadians.
There's just a magic hand over there. I listened to Alex Jones once, literally like the fucking melting brain George Carlin. He got me really spinning my wheels about how the world actually works.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for tuning into the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. And in this age of tyranny, we've got a lot of people thinking, I gotta move, I gotta go somewhere new. The laws where I live are not sane. They're not rational. They don't make me feel safe, nor do they make me feel comfortable. Luckily, I haven't been pushed to the brink of that yet, but unfortunately, today's guest cannot say the same. Luke Mitchell, host of the Luke Mitchell Show and creator of Luke Mitchell's Circus on YouTube, joined me today to talk about how he left Canada, peace, see you later, sayonara, and went to Florida. Luckily, his whole family joined him because, as he put it, they are not crazy, and he is not crazy. They don't think he's crazy. They are all very sane. So we ended up talking a little bit with Luke, and then Luke asked me a bunch of really great questions that I thought would be interesting to you here tuning in on the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. Maybe your family might ask you similar questions. Who knows? But I've thought about this a lot, and I really want to shorten the intros as much as possible, so you'll still hear the classic MFTIC rap song. You'll still hear the interlude made by yours truly, but the intros are going to be much shorter. I'm going to have to talk about our sponsors, but as far as all of the other interesting things that I tend to mention in the intro, you can tune in towards the end of the episode to hear all of that and much more, because the extended outros are going to be the place for all that stuff. So right off the bat, real quick, just want to thank Audrey Lobdell for all your Reiki and tuning fork needs. Hit her up. She is the one in the descriptions. And then, of course, Akasha Goods for all your holistic health resources, specifically some really cool candles to accelerate the energy of your home. And then finally, Fru's Forest Bathing Service. That's right, Fru's Forest Bathing Service. They are helping people connect with the natural energies of the earth. So that about does it for the intro. And without further ado, Luke Mitchell, the man behind the Luke Mitchell Show, and a very hilarious Instagram channel as well. You can find all the content at Luke Mitchell's Circus on YouTube, and follow him on Instagram. All the rest. Enjoy this conversation with myself and Luke Mitchell.
I'm kind of learning so much of it is real, like over the past 3 years, it's just been eye-opening how much is actually happening.
I agree. And I think that, that's the first episode I ever did for my podcast was about JFK, because that's when the conspiracy theorist term was born. And it was in response to everybody questioning what had happened to JFK. So I think we need a new term. I bought a t-shirt that said conspiracy analyst on it, and I thought that was cool until I realized it also said conspiracy anal on it.
Yeah.
So I'm not going to say I know what we should call ourselves, conspiracy researchers, or maybe just alternative researchers. That's like the more benign term that like the ancient alien type people call themselves. So cool with
right. Where do you start doing the research too? Like, because you can't just, that's one of the problems too, I find, is everyone, I was having like the jab debate with people in Canada. If you didn't know, I ran away. I'm living at my parents' house in Florida right now. So
okay,
I'm a nomad.
I love that. I knew you were Canadian, but you started talking about Florida, so that confused me, because my grandparents are Canadian, so I know Canadians, I know the accent. And then you started talking about Florida, and I'm like, I got a little confused. Okay, so you're from
like outside Toronto, Newmarket, where Jim Carrey's from.
Oh, okay, very cool.
Yeah. But what was I saying? I was basically just saying, like the debate of the job efficacy and stuff. Anytime you would have the conversation, it was always, look at the Canadian health government website says it's fine. It's like, well, that's your first problem. It's like typing into Google and it's Ghislaine Maxwell, a rapist murderer. You're probably going to get some BS runaround answers. You have to like go to like DuckDuckGo or something. That is so right off the bat, you're on not an even playing field with these people.
Well, and how do you even get them to trust alternative sources in the first place when they're so used to watching The View and all this other crap television that when they go on the internet, if it doesn't look like Oprah Winfrey telling them that this is the truth, then they get scared,
Yeah. And I'm in a very fortunate position because my life right now is the complete opposite of your podcast title. My whole family's awake.
That's awesome.
Literally everyone, like my sister might be the most awake, but yeah, so I'm in the fortunate position where my immediate family, I don't have to convince them of anything. They're just like, yeah, that makes sense.
Is that why you're in Florida? Did they all jump ship and say, let's get out of Canadistan or whatever?
Well, unfortunately, my parents didn't listen to me originally, and they got the first 2 shots, but they had bought this place, luckily, 3 years ago.
Oh, cool.
And I got out. So basically in Canada, you weren't allowed to get on an airplane after October 29th. And I was like, I packed up my condo, I packed up everything, all my gear, my film gear, and I just shipped it all down in my Mazda 3. And I have it here now. And my next option is moving to Mexico on like a 4-year visa.
Right on. Well,
Mexico is a whirlwind.
Mexico's going to be a lot cheaper than up here. I'll tell you that.
Yeah. Well, it's a lot easier too to live in Mexico. You only need to prove that you have like a certain amount of money in your bank. Whereas here, if I wanted to stay, I'd have to get like a 2-year visa, have 3 full-time employees, put $100,000 into like some business venture. Like it's a hassle.
So what do they expect you to be like secret agent Canada? Like, what do you, they just set up your home base? And
You
like,
Americans don't want Canadians. I don't think you want us.
we only want the successful, hyper successful Canadians. Wow.
Yeah. You got to literally just like fake marry someone, or that's pretty much it. Like,
wow. All right. I never knew that. My grandparents escaped Canada on train in the 1920s. So that's
escape.
yeah. Like my Pepe, he went down to Connecticut from New Brunswick and got a train, then hitched a ride with a buddy from Massachusetts down into where I live, and he started working at a rubber factory. And then he made enough money to send my grandma down. So then they started living down here. But yeah, definitely not similar at all, but kind of similar, because the economic forces at that time were like, yeah, we got to get the hell out of Canada. There's no jobs up here, you know?
Yeah. Well, it's Canada, like the economy there is just growing. There's just a magic hand over there. No, but Canada, the economy is growing like crazy, but the brainwashing is just at like a level where, like, you know, I listen to Alex Jones once in a while, every day, wink. And he always talks about like the fight that Americans have in them, and like there at least is some fights, you know, like in Canada, it was like it immediately everyone just turned on the unjabbed, and I just did not see any way of winning them back. So I was like, I gotta get out of here. Like the time just turned so drastically, so fast.
Yeah.
And I just
I don't know if I agree with Alex Jones with that, because in New Haven, Connecticut, the city where I live, they pretty much bent over and asked them to inject them in the rear. So it's, you know, it was just as bad in some parts of the US, you know?
Yeah. And that's, at least you guys have pockets though, right? Like literally there's no pocket in Canada. It's crazy. No pockets. Like there's like maybe like a 10-acre farm where people have RVs set up, but like, yeah. I didn't like the weather in Canada to begin with. I would rather just be a nomad.
Right.
We're going around the world, avoiding this.
Well, I know there's some holdouts in Calgary, but that's like freaking brutal weather, especially this time of year up there. Graham and Aaron on the Grimerica show. They've been on the show before. Yeah,
I listen to them. I was listening to them pretty hardcore, but now that I found your podcast, I've been listening to it pretty religiously. I'm actually a huge fan. You guys like you cut to the stuff I really enjoy and make it sound very pretty.
Thank you. Thank you. I try to let my ADD lead the way, and you know, sometimes like people start talking about something, and I'm just like, all right, let's move on. But yeah, I don't know. I've been a little weird about my interviews lately because I've done so many in a row that it was hard to like prepare for each one the way I want to. So my goal for 2022 is to like actually finish reading my guest book before I email them to have them on the show, because I get so excited. I like read the first chapter and then I'm like, all right, I got to email them. And then by the time they come on the week later, it's like I'm only at chapter 2 and I feel like a fucking idiot. So yeah, that's where I've been at lately. But thank you, man. I appreciate it. I think it's easier when you have as much free time as I do now after quitting my job and just working full time at this thing, man. And luckily, Sam Tripoli asked me to book for him, so that's kind of been helped me float along. But for a while, I was making like $0, and then I had this basically like epiphany, like, you know what, I need to network with other podcasters, you know, like that's how I'm gonna grow this podcast, but also maybe find other gigs to do like the one I had with Sam. So it's fucking happening, dude. I appreciate that people are vibing. I appreciate that you hit me up and that you like the show, man. I don't know. I've been recording because I don't want to miss anything fun, but I also
Oh, this is actually good. I like this. I like just kind of learning each other's backstories. I was gonna like
serve it
go
up.
Where are you living right now?
Connecticut. We're trying to get our own place, but we were actually thinking about going to Mexico possibly because my second aunt and uncle live down there, and they are telling us all how, you know, how sane it is and how clean, and like this one little community that they're in is by this beautiful lake. And so
Oh, dude, I know that I it's so funny. My parents have a friend here who was just talking about like their friend is retiring by this community by like there's like a famous lake in Mexico. Yeah,
Canadians.
Yeah,
This aunt and uncle are Canadian, so I'm sure your finger is on the right pulse. Like you,
Yeah.
it's a Canadian hotspot.
yeah. I was looking at literally like Mexico City. There's like a
Oaxaca.
Now, there's also the Playa del Carmen area, but that's been having like shootouts on the beach lately. I don't know if I want to be there. And then there's also
Become a war journalist.
then there's like what's the other side called? There's a huge
Baja.
like American hotspot over there.
Naming all the wrong places. Chihuahua.
Yeah. So let me see. Once I had it open here. There's people love this when we just pause and look for stuff on the internet.
I do it all the time. I screen share things, you know. You just can't tell because on the audio side, I edit it all out. I edit out all the pauses.
You do? Okay. I was going to ask because I listened to it. I'm like, oh, I've said it like they're pretty quick here, but that makes a lot more sense now.
Well, there are times where I pause and edit it out, but usually with the intros, I'll just be sitting there at my desk, like staring into the ceiling and be like, oh, and this.
Right.
Oh, and this. And then I go and edit it and it sounds like I'm like, yes, but it's like really slow and
Drawn out. Yeah.
Yeah.
Puerto Vallarta is a huge expat zone. I was also looking at, so the whole thing that inspired this was my sister's in real estate, and she knew a couple who just like a year ago when this all started, just picked up their family and moved to Costa Rica. And then I heard a guys on, I think it was Grimerica talking about how they moved to Costa Rica too from Canada because they had the same mindset where like they just didn't think there was any coming back from the mindset in Canada, and it was only going to get worse. And clearly, I mean, look at what's happening right now. They just entered full lockdown, even if you're double jab. So that worked. You know, like and now they're arresting people in Quebec. They have curfews. Like what? It's so sad, and it's just I have my sister back there right now. Her and her husband just decided to fly around the world like one last time, and then they went to Florida, Costa Rica, and the Dominican, and then Switzerland, which is where he's from. And apparently it's just as bad there too. So they're back in Canada now and saving up to like get a private jet out of there as soon as they can.
Yeah. I feel like, you know, there is a sort of like American privilege to all of this whole thing that
dude, when I listen to Sam talk, I'm like, he always mentions this thing. Sorry to cut you off, but he always mentions this thing where he says, you know, how much of this stuff really does affect you? And I want to like jump through the fucking screen and be like, dude, I literally packed up my life and left. Like, it's pretty drastic.
Well, and he gets affected by it big time. I know just from traveling, but you got to also keep in mind he's going to the states where they give the least fucks about it, which right. So, you know, and here it's kind of a mixed bag because there's a lot of conservatives here, despite it being a democratic state. So yeah, like really, I think I've said this before on the show, like my only real thing that I stopped doing was going to stores, you know, like the stores that wouldn't allow me in without a mask, I just stopped patroning them, you know, and it got to the point where that, you know, was every store at one point. Yeah. So I kind of got fucked and had to go to the grocery store with the mask. But other than that, you know, since then, and this is going to sound probably pretentious, but like coffee shops, I got really mad because I used to love buying coffees. And what's really cool is, as you saw the magic hand, my lovely girlfriend brought me my coffee. Now we have one upstairs with the steamer and the thing. So we make them all ourselves now. So it's really just pushed us to become more self-sufficient. But I think, with the freedom that freedom that Alex Jones talks about that we have as Americans, we really do kind of have like a little bit of a buffer compared to what I've heard it sounds like is going on in Australia, Canada, Europe. But I mean, we were all just born where we were born. It's one of those things like, I didn't choose for you to be born there and me to be born here. And like, unfortunately, the other side of it is a lot of Americans I notice are so indoctrinated that they're just like, they almost put on this like bravado that I think adds to the perspective that Americans are stupid, right? Which I agree with as an American. I'm like, yeah, most of us are pretty fucking stupid. But for someone from another country's perspective to see us the way we are right now, I can imagine we sound like whiners, but at the same time, there are like really real shit. There are really Orwellian things going on in places like New York City, in places like Los Angeles. Like my sister, she's probably not going to be able to keep her job because she works in New York City. So it was a slow kind of push for a lot of people, including myself. I mean, the job thing was a big fuck you, because I worked for Amazon as a delivery guy. And
I heard that.
Yeah. So, when they started putting a laser, I'll tell you the story. You'll probably appreciate it. So I go to work every day and my routine was so down pat. I mean, I had everything planned out from like when I would smoke a little bit of weed on my break, when I would eat a yogurt, like when I would stop, where I would stop, like what I would listen to. And I was like plugged in, Higher Side Chats, Sinful Hat, those conspiracy guys, like back to back 8-hour shifts, right? So I loved my job. It was great. Then we show up to the factory warehouse place and they're like, you got to put a mask on when you're loading your truck. We don't care if you wear it during the day, but you got to put it on when you're loading your truck. And I'm like, all right, whatever. It's 30 minutes of the day. I'll wear the mask while I'm loading the truck. So that went on for maybe 2 weeks. And then I see this guy standing like kind of at the gates of the warehouse. And he's like, all right, everybody line up. And I'm like, why are we lining up? Like, this is supposed to be a rush. Like, everybody rushes into the warehouse and like packs their van up as fast as they can. Like, that's the idea, right? And now they're stopping everybody to make us wait in a line to go into the warehouse in groups of 3. So, and keep in mind, this is a massive warehouse. Like, you could probably put like 10 people on my shoulders and we'd still be like grabbing for the ceiling. Like, it's a massive warehouse. I'm like, there's no social distancing necessary in this massive warehouse.
Yeah.
So we start lining up. We do the social distancing thing. That's like, I got about 2 weeks left at that point, right? Because I'm starting to really, this starting to wear on me. And the final straw was the laser. They start lining us up like we were lining up to go into the warehouse in groups. And they're like, all right, now we have to point a laser at your forehead to tell your temperature. And if you read hotter than 100 degrees, you got to go home. Keep in mind, I drive an hour to work every day. So if someone like has me show up to work and then says I have to go home, I just wasted 2 hours of gas for nothing, right? So I'm a hothead already. So I'm like, I'm pissed off and I'm like, well, of course I'm going to be 100. Like I was fuming and then they put a laser in my head. So I told them to fuck off. I said, this is like, I'm embarrassed about it, but I went out of the line and I started like trying to rally the troops, like all the other delivery drivers, they're all like vaping and like chewing bubble gum and looking at me like, what the fuck, and I'm like, don't you guys see? We need to stand up. They're taking our fucking freedoms away. This ends tomorrow. No masks. And this was like March 17th, 20. Like this was not even like, we were not even
just a beginning.
It was like
Welcome
June
to-
2020. It was so like soon into it. But anyways, yeah, that's how I lost my job. I turned into a COVID madman and quit.
Well, I was lucky that I was like filming houses, and people were like, I was like the best business to be in because everyone wanted like virtual houses like filmed, right? Because they weren't going to them. So my business was booming, but it got to the point where people were asking me like, "Oh, do you have the jab?" And I'm like, "No." And they would get all weird and be like, "Well, that's going to be a problem." And I was like, "I'm filming the house alone."
Yeah, you're like going in when no one else is there.
Yeah. So it's just like literally like the fucking melting brain. And I love when Sam says that the mental gymnastics you have to do to have this make sense. It's just like at an all-time retarded level, in my opinion.
You know what? And it's kind of in this weird way, politically, socio-politically creeped in through the left, because I remember this personality, and I'm stereotyping, but fuck, look at where we're at right now. You know, I love this conversation, but there was this like hypochondriac nature that came in with certain personality types that really loved the left. You know, loved the left-wing politics. And I was a left-wing guy for a little while. Like, I used to call myself Hippie Mark, and I thought, you know, we were going to, you know, burn down the system with Bernie and all that bullshit. But I noticed when I was working at a farmer's market in 2019, like something was weird. I called the health inspector a Nazi, and me and my coworker who used to be the co-host on this show, Jay, my buddy, we were like getting harassed hardcore by the health inspector people, right? At this farmer's market. Now, keep in mind, we're selling bread, right? Bread doesn't have COVID, and COVID wasn't even a thing back then either way. So we're selling bread, and I'm cutting up samples, and we put the samples out on the table, and one day they come along and they're like, yeah, so, you know, we have new rules and you're going to need a sneeze guard for your table. And I'm like, a sneeze guard? Why do I need a sneeze guard? And he's like, well, there are germs and particulars that are going to come from someone's face and maybe land on the bread, and then someone will eat the sample and that could cause a problem. And I'm like, are you kidding me? I was like, you realize if somebody sneezes on the bread, I'm right here. I'm going to take the bread. I'm going to chuck it in the trash. I'm not just going to leave it there so somebody can come and sample it, you know? And like something as like common sense as that, like if somebody ruins the bread, you know, they couldn't trust us to manage that. They couldn't trust us to manage our own bread, the one that we drove there. Keep that in mind. So we had to put this sneeze guard on our table. It completely, like, I don't want to say like cut our profit in half, but probably like a good third of it went away because those samples were a big part of what we did. And it was really strange how, you know, this health inspector guy just was so like we called him a Nazi to his face. I'm like, dude, you're a fucking Nazi, bro. Like, what is your problem? They had to like other farmer market people were like, what's your deal, man? Are you okay? I'm like, me? I'm like, he's a fucking asshole. And they're like, he's the health inspector. You got to be nice to him. I'm like, be nice to him. He's a fucking asshole. Like, I'm not playing politics, you know, like I've never been that guy, but I saw it happen in the farmer's market, which is supposed to be like free love, open air, you know, everybody's here kind of crunchy, and they believe in like, you know, the dirtier you are, the healthier you are. Like, that sounds like not a great way to phrase it, but you know, this whole culture of, oh, you know, clean your children off and disinfect them, it's making for weak immune systems. And
George Carlin has that. He just nailed the bit. Like, you don't even have to like dive into it because he nailed that bit so well, like 20 years ago. I was going to ask, what would you say your first kind of step towards, fuck, I have to call it conspiracy theorism, but what would you say it was? I like, for me, it was probably watching George Carlin. He got me really spinning my wheels about how the world actually works.
Well, I mean, yeah, I love this question. I feel like it was a series of events, but I mean, if I really had to boil it down to like when the youngest would be like Ripley's Believe It or Not, those book series. And like, I remember spontaneous combustion, Bigfoot, UFOs, like
Right.
Like reading about that at like 7, I was like, this is too cool to be true. And I'm like, I really was like not believing it, but I thought it was really fascinating. So that was kind of the first foray for me. But then when 9/11 happened, I lived, I don't know, 30, 40 miles away from New York City. So it was kind of a big deal where I live. And we got, sent home from school, and they were playing the towers falling on TV in our elementary school before our parents, were called to come pick us up. I live close enough to school where I just walked the fuck home. But I remember looking up in the sky thinking like, is there terrorists? Like, what's going on?
Yeah.
So that was a little bit of a wake up. And then I got really into like conservative politics after that, because like a lot of people did, they kind of got into this like nationalism and America first, and we got to fight the terrorists. And I'm only in like middle school, so I'm just hearing what my grandfather's talking about as he's watching Fox News. And as I got older and older and started to really see the world for myself, I'm like, wow, this guy's racist. This guy's all wrong. Like my grandpa's an asshole. I love my grandpa. And it's funny how like 8 years later, Trump unites us back together, because we're both kind of like, yeah, Trump's fucking cool, right? Like, but like when the Bush era was around, like we would butt heads all the time. So that's when I first became kind of like anti-establishment, was when I saw like the Bush era politics and the war and 9/11, and it all just didn't fit with me. So that's when I started going online. I found loose change, and the internet was still free enough in 2009, 2008, where you can find documentaries like that. And I wasn't into podcasting back then. I wish I had found like an audio show back then, but I guess I'll say that. And then also when I was in college, I'd already smoked a bunch of weed, and weed was a big part of it, obviously, like reminding me how right I was about the establishment and my choice to be anti-establishment. But college was a big one. And I've talked about this on my show a bunch with my mentor, Amos, who basically broke down Skull and Bones to me in a way that not only made sense, but I was like, whoa, okay, like that's what's going on, because I had kind of felt like there was something strange and there was a weird occult thing going on. But when my friend Amos pointed out the group and said, yeah, it's most likely they're doing this,
Right.
I didn't believe it. I didn't want to like say like, to this day, I don't think Skull and Bones is the one and only power occult group, but it's one of the Legion of Doom, right? So
Yeah, it's funny because I would, if I were going to put money on which one I think it is, it's probably Freemasonry. But that's just me. I'm a rookie in this whole thing.
Okay.
To me, it just seems like conspiracy theorists almost taken to such a confusing level that it could be just so plain and blatantly obvious that it's right in front of your face.
Right.
But I don't know. Maybe I just don't know enough, and maybe you can enlighten me on why that might not be the right choice.
Well, I think, I think what you just said is kind of brilliant in a way, and I agree with it. It does get complicated to the point where it does turn maybe armchair researchers away. I would just say it works that way to their benefit, right? So the Freemason group, you're absolutely right, harbors a lot of these people, but is it as simple as that like all Freemasons are bad and none of them are good? No. And it's not as simple as, oh, they're all good and none of them are bad, right? So I think what we have, and you see it with a group like Skull and Bones the most, where 15 members per year in the class, right? So you have a class of however many thousand kids in Yale each year, and of those, 15 get chosen to be in Skull and Bones, and 15 of those are usually from connected, wealthy families, right? So I don't know if it's the group itself, but I think the way power works, the way elites run their lives, they'll conduct their activities under the auspices of these various groups. And they use these secret groups to make connections, and then maybe, a more out in the open group like the Freemasons ends up creating a lesser known group, like, you know, the Order of Orange, you know, and then these Order of Orange guys are all like, you know what, we really like what we're doing. Let's make our thing grow. Let's go to other Masonic lodges and recruit more Freemasons from other places. So now you have like what's like an outward venue, that's the Masonic lodge, with like a sort of esoteric inner group that kind of is able to navigate all these lodges. You know, it's, to me, I think it's a system outside of our modern visible public world. It's a private world. And that's, again, it's not to say that it's all bad. Like you and I could start our own club and not invite anybody to the meetings and do whatever the fuck we want, you know, and that's not to say that we're going to be doing evil things just because we want it to keep a secret about it. Right. So I think it's just the way power groups work. So whether I'm going to like sit here and be like, well, you're all wrong, Luke, it's definitely the Freemasons or not, like, no, I don't want to do that. But I think the point is for us to crowdsource our research and use our instincts to kind of be our own guide, because it might not be the Freemasons in your town or your area, but I do think that like a certain group of Freemasons in some town might be up to no good. And we have historical evidence of that the whole anti-Masonic movement in the late 19th century was because a group of Masons were basically controlling a whole town, and somebody was, you know, a political opponent or a community opponent, and he ended up getting hung and dragged through the streets. And so many people were upset about this man's murder and how the Masons in that town just covered it up and, you know, didn't let anybody know the real story. It was all pretty obvious what had happened. And I think that led, I could get the exact facts, but the anti-Masonic movement was not good for the Masons. And since then, there's been a bunch of like sort of pseudo-Masonic groups that have came about, like the Shriners. And, you know, what's his name?
I just like, when I there was this guy who was on Australian X Factor, and he put out like this 4-hour long video about the Masons. Do you see that video?
Well, yes. And you know what?
And he was talking like, if you look back, if you look at like all these figureheads, like Karl Marx is doing the hidden hand of Freemasonry. And you're just like, well, if Karl Marx is doing the hidden hand of Freemasonry, the biggest scumbag known to man, well, one of them. I mean, there's a good.
Well, and you know what it is? It's the road to hell is paved with good intentions. So someone like Karl Marx maybe thought he was doing good by creating Marxism, but clearly Marxism is a tool used by bad people to, you know, control and ruin people's lives, right? So, and I think that's the same thing that Masonry does, is it kind of creates these inner circles, and whatever happens in those inner circles is up to our interpretation. But yeah, I watched that video. I didn't watch the whole thing. I watched it in pieces, but it just struck me as like flat earth anti-Freemasonry, which I'm not against flat earth. I have the globe in my background here to kind of show people that I'm a little bit more on that side of things, but I'm also very open-minded. I don't want to like I don't go against flat earth, but flat earthers have this sort of illusion that it all must be one group, you know, it's gotta be the Freemasons. So that bothers me. I can't say I'm the expert, but I definitely don't think it's as simple as that. I think more esoteric groups use the Freemasons sort of as like a cover, you know, so they're able to operate within this social structure that the Masons created, but it's not limited to like, oh yeah, we're all just Freemasons, because you have Rosicrucians, and then within that you have people with different competing political ideologies, you know, and that really tends to be what shapes history, is who wins those political bickering matches, because the winner rewrites history in a lot of cases, you know, and like someone like Napoleon is a good example of that. I mean, if I asked you a couple of facts about Napoleon, One or two of them might be he was short, he was bald, like if you look up Napoleon in like a kid's story or telling of history, they tell you all this stuff about him, that he was like a megalomaniac dictator. But someone who I've been reading lately, Walter Bosley, wrote a whole book about how Napoleon was absolutely not that at all. And the only reason we remember him that way is because the British absolutely hated Napoleon and wrote as much propaganda against them as they could. And the truth is, Napoleon was probably more interested in some of the subjects that I talk about on my show than you might have suspected, like pyramids and ancient relics and things like that. So Napoleon is a good example of how history just gets totally beaten up if you're the loser of a certain battle,
Yeah. Well, it's funny. I have this chart here from this guy on Instagram. I said, "What level are you at?" And level 1 is, so it's basically like a conspiracy chart, and it's GMOs, 9/11 inside job, Area 51, fake news, chemtrails, Iraq was for oil. That's level 1. Some of them on here, I don't even know what they are. JFK assassination, Illuminati, false flags. What's NWO?
New World Order.
New World. Martial law. Then level 3 is RFID chip, DUNBS, moon landing faked, rigged elections, crisis actors.
Okay.
And what is it? What's DUNBS?
Deep underground military bases.
Okay, I agree. Yeah. And then RFID chip?
That is a radio frequency identification device.
Okay. And then level 4 is predictive programming, secret societies, FEMA camps, CERN, Big Six control media. I don't get that's level 4, but. And then level 5 is 2030 UN agenda. The Clintons are murderers. Harvard, MK Ultra, Bohemian Grove. Level 6 is aliens or demons. Rothschilds, Black Pope, Jesuit order, Synagogue of Satan, blood sacrifices, and Project Louis. Okay. If you could make a level 7, what would be in that?
Well, I gotta critique that hierarchy.
A lot of that list, like, it was repetitive.
Well, I'll say, if I'm gonna put a higher level on that, it would be the realization that it doesn't fall into Christian versus Satan. Because I feel like that's a big hang up in the conspiracy community is, and I'm not against Christianity. I'm against what they've done historically, for sure. I mean, everyone should be. What the Christians have done to a lot of cultures is really brutal, but I mean, you can't really, most cultures you can say that about. But back to my point, it seems like there's a lot of people who come to conspiracy from Christianity, and Gordon White, someone who I just had on the show, calls it churchianity, because it's really not what Christians preach. If you go back to their own literature, it's this sort of like add-on that's been put on in America by preachers, and this whole fire and brimstone, the devil's gonna get you if you don't follow everything we say and be a good member of the community. That whole thing, save the accent. But yeah, it would be a cool level to think that, the world's like synagogue of Satan, and then go above that and realize, like, no, it's more like the yin yang here, and these are just the cosmic forces that are constantly at work. There's always going to be destruction and creation constantly causing friction. That's how, in my opinion, the forces of the universe operate. It's a constant balance between those two opposites. So I think the next level of that chart would be like the 7 Hermetic laws.
So, okay, there's so much I want to talk about. But, so first of all, do you think Satan's real? And second, who do you think is the Antichrist? And let's say that Christianity isn't real for a second here. And let's say that the devil isn't real, and all this shit that these people in these secret societies worship, it's not actually real, but because they believe it is, it's just as effective. So I don't know if that's a question or what, but who do you think the Antichrist is, and do you think the devil's real?
Right. Well, you asked me whether or not I think Satan's real. So I'm going to answer that, and then I'll answer the devil one. But also, I like what you just said. I think that's very true. I think consciousness and what we believe and like is inextricable. It's absolutely a part of every experience. Now, does that make something less real because just because you believed in it, it happened? I don't think so. I think that just indicates how powerful our minds are and why it's so important to understand these things, because what I've come to understand is there's like a sort of cultural overlay through which you can see the world, and that overlay is the same every time, like a video game. You know, when you see the screen, it's just based on the culture, it changes, you know? So like, you know, you might not call the negative energy in your life a demon if you're in this culture, but if you're in this culture, you would, right? So
Yeah.
I
agree.
I want to answer the question about Satan because, well, there's no definition. I have a book here, Encyclopedia of Occultism. I thought they might have a neat definition of Satan, but they don't.
Everyone's bedside book.
Well, Satan, you know, it's, to me, it's, you know, it's an amalgamation of ideas and experiences and also literature. So it's hard to be like, oh yeah, no, it doesn't exist, because clearly it does. And it exists in people's lives, especially people like Anton LaVey, who went and made the whole, you know, Satanism thing, which I think, again, I don't agree with it at all, because there's some really creepy shit that's going on and really horrendous shit that's going on in the name of that. But if you read that guy's book, he's not actually like advocating for murder, right? So even though murderous people are gravitating towards this weird thing called Satanism, it doesn't seem like beyond Anton LaVey, there is an actual Satanism, right? It's just a figure in history and specifically mythology. So I think it's like a catch-all term, the same way we would use alien to describe anything that would come out of a flying saucer. Right?
Yeah. Do you think they're interdimensional? What do you think?
Right.
They're
I think there's real evil, man. I think that if you interact with these multidimensional forces in a way that's irresponsible, you might run into some bad motherfuckers, and that could be Satan, you know, like for real. I think there's stories of people.
Alex Jones thinks they're real for sure.
Well, dude, Alex Jones is going a buck, you know, 150 after them if he does see them, because he's, you know, on, I don't know, 50 cc's of Red Bull over there. But yeah. Yeah. I think it's real. And to your point, it's as real as you make it. But what you learn from the occult is like, there are rituals to interact with these disembodied beings. And what you find out is the people who do these rituals, they usually don't end up with great consequences, or at least the ones we hear about. I mean, for all I know, Jeff Bezos and Bill Gates could have done one of these rituals, and that's how they got $1 billion, right? I don't know. But the point is it seems really risky, and it seems really unworth it to do those like satanic rituals, because it doesn't seem like it's a bargain that you're ever going to win. Like the whole idea of like selling your soul to the devil, you know, for riches and fame and fortune, you know, it's pretty obvious that it doesn't end well for most celebrities, right? We see a lot of celebrities who sold their soul to the devil die young or die from drugs or whatnot. So I don't think that I can ever say, no, it doesn't exist. I think evil exists, man, in the same way that the yin and yang shows that balance. But I don't know, a little stoned, a little heady. And there's two other questions that you asked me that I want to get to.
Who's the Antichrist? But before I get into that, oh man, I just forgot what I was going to say. It has to do with like, so I was hearing that literally during NFL games, like Tom Brady's wife is a part of this shit and like cast spells mid-game. Like, so I don't know, like maybe there is some benefit to casting spells. Maybe you'll
think about it.
Best
think about a guy like Tom Brady. Now, I don't know his life. I've not read his biography, so forgive me if I make any sort of assumptions here, but I would assume that a guy like him came from a pretty upstanding, wealthy, connected family, or probably at least his skills were so good that they're like, you need to be in the right school to keep doing this, right? And those schools end up being elite sporting schools, but these elite schools also have groups like Skull and Bones within their realms, because, you know, Yale isn't the only college that has a secret society like this. Harvard has, you know, I think they're called like the Porcelain Key Club or something weird like that. And then there's probably one for every Ivy League school and beyond. So I don't know what school Tom Brady graduated from, but I imagine that his wife probably is college educated as well, or comes
He's from Brazil.
Oh, interesting. Well, if she's from Brazil, that she might be doing black magic, because there's what they call Kimbanda magicians in Brazil. And
Oh, great.
because what happened with Brazil is a lot of the diaspora from Africa, obviously, they didn't just forget their culture, you know, even though the colonists tried to shove Christianity down their throats, they kept a lot of their culture. And if you study like the indigenous diaspora and the blending and, you know, of their magical arts, it kind of includes saints and whatnot, but it also includes what they used to do in indigenous cultures, which is a little scary to our Western minds, but it's really not all that strange. I mean, it's something that I think human beings have all done, like regardless of culture, is interacted with the universe in a magical way. It's just depending on your culture, you use different methods and say different words and take on different practices or roles to achieve that. But in essence, it's, you know, it's a magical relationship with our world that gives anybody any kind of success, because I think that's just the way the universe works. You don't have to understand how it works to be successful, but it's that click, it's that sync up that occurs for successful people where they realize, oh, what's happening with magic is actually something everybody's doing in their life, but they're just not aware of it. So they naturally make mistakes. And then there's people who just flow with it and they actually are pretty great. But I don't know. Does that answer your question? I've never heard of the wife of Tom Brady, but I do know that in Brazil, they have some black magic shit going on.
I want to say it was actually in that guy's like 4-hour long video when he was just like naming everyone who has ties to Freemasonry and the occult in general. And I know that J.K. Rowling has like a famous tattoo on her arm, basically like that's an actual spell within the Freemasonic literature. And then he went on to talk about how Tom Brady's wife like does spells during games. And it was just like, I was like, holy fuck, these people believe it to such an extent. And then there was another like famous woman she had like this big tub of like weird looking black water. And she was like referencing another spell that she was just cleaning up after like a week of doing it. It was fucking nuts. Like if you watch that video, I was watching it late at night, like shaking in my bed.
Well, it's become kind of like sadly pop, like to do all this magic stuff, like Demi Lovato and like what's her name, you know.
Machine Gun Kelly has Freemason shit on all the time. It's like, I don't know. I had I had an uncle,
okay,
who was a 33rd degree Mason, great uncle. He was a Green Beret. And I didn't know this. My cousin told me because he said he saw him one night walk by his bed as a ghost. And then he didn't know who he was. And he told his dad in the morning. And then he went down to the basement and there was just a photo of this guy. And he's like, oh my God, that's the guy I saw. And then it just came out. And it turned out he was a 33rd degree Mason. He served the Queen. And I was just like, what the fuck? So my cousin was telling me that basically, like, if you sell your soul, you're stuck in this realm forever.
Mm.
Is that real?
Well, they were just talking about that on Tinfoil Hat in a way, talking about how ghosts, the difference between residual hauntings. And so I think there is something to that, you know. I don't know if it means selling your soul through an organization like Freemasonry. It's totally possible, but there's something that happens between dying and being dead, where your soul leaves your body and is supposed to go through what's called the Science of Bardo, right? And this is a subject that I learned about, and I'm like, what the fuck? You know, this is probably like 5 or 6 years ago I started reading about this. But in Tibet, the monks and the shamans and, you know, the spiritual people, I don't know their exact denominatum, but they have this Science of Bardo, right? And if you buy the Tibetan Book of the Dead, you can read a little bit about this, but they talk about how when your body dies, your soul leaves, you go towards this white light, you have a life review, you know, you see everything that you did right, you see everything you did wrong, you see everything you could have done, and then you're kind of left to, you know, do whatever, and then eventually you choose to go back into a human body. And Sam Tripoli talks about this all the time because it's the only part he remembered when he learned about the Tibetan Book of the Dead. But you choose your next life based on, you know, how your new parents are fucking, what their fuck style is. So you kind of creep into you know,
weird.
Right. I don't know how true that is, but it does kind of show you that even in ancient cultures, they were thinking about, you know, the spirit, body, and the difference between the two and what happens after death. And they even kind of maybe sussed out a whole process. That to me is always fascinating because I like to go back and find old ancient examples because you can't trust stuff in the past 100 years. I mean, that's just, I always have like a much larger grain of salt for anything that came out in the past 100 years compared to something that came out that far back. What that says about me, I don't know. But as far as like somebody becoming a Freemason and then their soul getting trapped in this plane, there's a lot of ritual that those people do that, yeah, maybe could do that. I've also heard that people who become like alcoholics, that same thing happens. Like they're so in love with alcohol and that bar that they go to, or their particular ritual, you know, maybe they go to a store to buy alcohol, that after they die, their spirit, their ghost will haunt that same sort of bar or that same like road to get the beer. So I think anything that you do with enough, and if you think about a military person, like they are very dedicated to certain, you know, set of rituals. They might not think of them as rituals, but like dressing up and like, you know, putting on your boots and doing the whole like, you know, marching in motion, like that's a ritual, like, you know,
Right,
like,
yeah.
and they do that like with, you know, a lot of pride and make sure that they do it right and correctly each time. Precision, that's the word I'm looking for. So with that in mind, I could see that happening where someone who's really like a really dedicated military man gets left in his body. I don't know. I mean, or in the purgatory realm. I guess that's kind of how I heard it described recently, but it's not purgatory like Christians talk about where it's like, oh, you go there and you never leave. It's like an in-between stage. So maybe there is something that we're doing here in the earthly plane that's allowing that to happen, where ghosts are kind of getting trapped in that liminal space and they're not able to move on to their, you know, next incarnation because maybe like Wi-Fi or something, they get stuck in the Wi-Fi field and then they're haunting your house for 20 years until the Wi-Fi gets shut off.
That's hilarious. I never even thought about that. Can you imagine just like all the 5G towers and just trapping everyone's ghosts now?
That's I mean, that's probably why they set them up in schools. They want haunted schools.
Okay, crazy.
Well, I was in touch with a girl who worked for AT&T in 2020 when this all went down, and she was like, yeah, we've been putting 5G towers in schools now that the kids are all out of school because they sent everybody home for COVID around that time. Like they got like an extra 2 months off that summer in the States. And I thought that was really strange that the phone companies were all ready to go and set them all up with the 5G, you know, smart learning centers. It's like, come on. And now the kids are having heart attacks in class. It's like, yeah, because they're fucking guinea pigs running around in a hyperstatic electro room. Like there's like lightning bolts shooting out of the computer.
They're shoving shit in their skin. We're blasting shit out of their skin.
Yeah.
We're really getting our kids a good future.
Well, you know, survival of the fittest, right?
Yeah. Well, fuck, this is a stupid little offhand to that. My dad, obviously old guy in Florida, probably getting upsold, We get a new 5G fucking router put in, and it's the exact same speed as our 2.4. I'm like, what is the benefit of I got it fucking taken out and I got the old one put back in? I'm like, what is the benefit of this?
Yeah.
Like with the 2.4, you're still getting like almost 500 megabytes of upload and download speed. Like, what are you sending?
Yeah.
Where you need a gigabyte, 2 gigabytes, like what do we have that's fucking needed?
Yeah. It makes me think of that like metaverse art that they showed in the Facebook presentation, where it's like this big, like worm looking thing, like a parasite. And they're like, look how cool it is. It's 3D street art, and you're like, who made that? It's like a gross, like stomach parasite, with 80s colors, like flying out of a wall. But when I look at that and then I try to imagine what that 5G electro field looks like, what if information is literally flowing through that energy field like a big worm-looking parasite, and like you're just standing in your living room like, hey, Mom, and like a fucking energy parasite that's your sister's like, selfies getting, homework getting downloaded, like it goes through your kidneys or something, like I think that's what we're heading towards. We just don't have the like goggles to see it happening yet.
That would be fucking crazy when they make goggles that you can actually see the information traveling around.
Well, that's the metaverse. What if that's the metaverse? I mean, maybe that's why they want it to be 5G, because they can send like this field and put this field around you easier.
That would be fucking crazy.
Yeah.
Well, I've heard the conspiracy that space is actually like a dense liquid. I don't know if that. My girlfriend has a PhD in radiochemistry, so she's a legit scientist. So maybe me talking about this isn't the best idea, because she'll be like, "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard."
You might not want to bring this up with her. That's not good pillow talk.
Yeah. Well, that was actually going back to the first part of this conversation, like of the podcast, was how I really knew that this was like not actually about your health. Was she didn't want to take this thing, the jab, and she couldn't get work. And she was at like one of the biggest power plants in Ontario doing like the science for like a cancer portion of that. So when that got in the way of keeping on like a smart mind, I knew, I was like, okay, this isn't good. This is way beyond about your health, and look, it's reign true. So
right, yeah, I actually have a patron that used to work for big pharma and quit her high-paying job to be a housewife, or and I think she runs her own business. Actually, shout out to fuck it. Shout out to Elle. She gave me essential oils. They're somewhere in my cabinet, but yeah, there's a lot of people that's happened to. And it's funny that like the average person doesn't see that, like the fact that all of the nurses don't want to get the vaccine is a red flag. It's like, they're like, oh yeah, the hospitals are understaffed, but why are they understaffed? Not because all the nurses have COVID, because the nurses don't want to be forced to get the vax. That should tell everybody the message loud and clear. And like the hospitals were all empty too 2 years ago. But yeah, I mean, to your point about the space being a liquid, because I think that's much more enticing of an idea. I would recommend checking out Crow 777 and his lunar wave footage, where he finds like,
yeah, I heard that podcast. That's where I kind of got the idea.
Right.
Yeah.
I'm sure, but Crow's video on the lunar wave, when you see it, if you maybe you saw it, but it's pretty cool. Like, I mean, it's hard to explain. I'm not a camera expert, so maybe you said you work with cameras, so maybe you might have seen your like the technical error that might cause that to happen. But Crow seems to be pretty
shutter. It could be a shutter speed thing.
Yeah,
shutters cause ripples. Like if I were to film that TV behind us at the wrong shutter, you would see waves coming through the TV that the eye can't see.
Right. Now, with that in mind, the TV is kind of like like you wouldn't expect the moon to behave the same way a TV would, right? And create those ripples. So I wonder what it is about the moon, unless it's just a
I gotta see the footage, because I think light, it has waves, right?
Mm-hmm.
It's not just one linear.
Right.
So this light is putting off a certain wavelength. So you're capturing the wavelength. If you change your shutter, I didn't see the footage, so I don't know. I'm just guessing. If you change the shutter of your camera, you might pick up the certain wavelengths that are being emitted.
Right. Well, I definitely think you should look it up because it's interesting. You know, again, not a computer camera expert, but he uses a telescope and a camera to do that, and it's fascinating. I mean, I think the idea that space is fake, I'm not into that. I don't believe in the dome.
You know how hard that is to fake that, and how much less interesting it is to think that it is fake.
Right. Like we're really like just guinea pigs at that point in like a hamster cage, you know?
Yeah. Yeah. And think about how many people dedicated their entire lives to researching it. And I mean, well, people have dedicated their lives to a lot of things that have ended up being negative. So I guess that's a bad formality, but
depending on what documentary you watch on Netflix, you can see a lot of.
If I have to listen to one more person tell like reference a Netflix documentary facts, I'm gonna fucking blow my head off. Like, oh man, the other day I was on the phone with a friend of mine, and they were just like, "Yeah, like the big problem with viruses spreading around the world is factory farming, and like that's part of the reason why COVID got out and all this shit." I'm like, well, that's the problem right there. Like, just that mindset. I get factory farming is terrible. Like, I'm not a big advocate for that. Like, we should be much better at how we farm. The first problem with factory farming is Bill Gates owned all the fucking farmland in the U.S., so that's a big issue. And secondly, we all know that fucking Fauci was funding the research out of what is that lab in the U.S.? It was
Fort Detrick.
Yeah, and then he moved it to Wuhan. Like the ideology that this is still animal related, or like that it broke out of just some bad out of fucking Wuhan, is just so old. And like to use some Netflix documentary to back that, like I just can't. I can't even have the conversations anymore because people are so. You get to a point where like you've heard so many mind bending shows with like yours, Sam's, just people who are like willing to think alternatively, that like when you meet, like when you just talk to someone who uses fucking CNN or a Netflix as their basis for understanding the world, you like, you're almost like, wow, like we're in trouble.
Right.
Yeah.
It's this, you know, it's foolishness, it's shallowness, but you know, everybody's on their own path. And I think that the truth is when you're like doing this long enough, because, you know, it's funny. I just had a conversation with Loomis from Chant It Down Radio, and he's been doing his podcast for like 7 years, like, well, now 9 years because it's 2022. And he's, you know, kind of seems like he's a little disenfranchised with podcasting even now because he's very anti-system. But it was cool to talk to him. And one of the things that he told me is like, yeah, man, I love the name of your show because it reminds me of something that I forget who he said called it this, but the bullhorning phase. Like when you learn all this stuff, you just want to tell everybody about it. And then you realize like nobody cares, or at least the people in your immediate surroundings don't. So the podcast has been a blessing because during my bullhorning phase, I kind of had a whole bunch of people to talk to about it. And then they kind of cooled my head because I'm like, oh, wow, all right, people get it. You know, like I have people listening to my show, huge amount of people listen to Sam's show. So it's pretty obvious that we're not alone in thinking this. But then I get kind of caught up in like nitpicking other people's perspectives, which I don't ever want to do because I think everybody will come to their own truth or figure out the truth on their own with the right preparation. And I can only do that for myself, really. You know, if I
see. Oh, good. It's good. Go on. Continue. Sorry.
No, it's all right. I was going to say I can only do that for myself. But if people listen to the show and, you know, get a certain clue or a hint from me, that's great. But I don't ever want the show to be like, well, if you don't agree with us, then you're out of here. Like this is the only truth on the podcasting space, you know, because we're all just trying to crowdsource this research together. That's how I feel.
I do agree with not trying to force your opinions and point of views. But the problem is when the other side is forcing it to such a drastic point where now in Canada, in Quebec, they're talking about not allowing you to buy weed or alcohol from stores anymore if you're not jabbed. That's when it's like, okay, now when's the time to push back? You know, like when is the time? How long are you going to be allowed to, or how long should you be willing to just take the shit before you go, you know what? Like, fuck you. This is going to get, if you want to get down and dirty, let's get it down and dirty and like, let's duke it out. But like, what I'm trying to say is how long do you just take it before you go, enough's enough?
Yeah. Yeah, no, again, as an American, I don't feel like I'm under those same pressures because for whatever reason, and then our president sucks right now. Don't get me wrong. I mean, fuck him.
Are you kidding me?
Yeah.
The pig?
So like, you know, it's definitely not easy. Gas prices are going up and all that, but there is a certain complacency here that maybe pushes us not to riot. But yeah, I can see where, you know, them starting to restrict your cannabis and alcohol purchases, that might cause some riots for sure. I mean, geez.
It won't because everyone who's cool left.
Well, that's what happened in LA. Sam was saying it's like actually no, Greg was saying this. He's like, you know, somebody got elected into his local office in San Diego, and he was like, you know, maybe this freaking Newsom hand puppet wouldn't have gotten elected if all the cool people didn't move to Texas, because that's what happened in California, you know. And I kind of feel like all the New York people moved to my state, so like things have gone up over here. There's less places that are available for me to rent because I've been looking for a new apartment, and it just seems like it's fucking the worst time to do that, or
right.
You know. so yeah, it's definitely not easy. But I think what might be really cool to see is like, I don't know if you remember the Yellow Jacket movement and like everything that was going on in 2019. I feel like you guys in the EU and Canada and Australia, you know, even though things are more Orwellian there, you do have this sense of like, well, we're not going to take it. Like, as much as Alex Jones likes to say Americans have that sense, like, I would disagree. I think you guys do more so because, and again, you're not in Canada right now anymore, but yeah, I think that if something's going to happen, it's going to happen with those boys.
I would say that mindset is big in Europe. Europe has a lot more of a fuck you attitude. Canada does not.
No.
Canada is so compliant, like it's scary. The best lie that was ever told to Canadians was they're the nicest people in the world because it's so compliant. Like it's really insane.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, my grandma's kind of like that. I'll say she was born in Canada, but she spent most of her life here in the States. But yeah, she doesn't really question the authority. It's funny. I feel like there's something to that.
Yeah.
You know, I don't like British people too much though, because they're French. That was the one thing I learned about. It's like there's this kind of weird British versus French thing going on up in Canada, and everybody versus the red man.
But Quebec wanted to like break away from Canada forever. Like there were votes like pretty frequently where they were like, let's just break away. I wish the U.S. would follow Canada. I want to. Is
there a big French resistance from this in Quebec, or are they all just?
Not really. There was like a video of like 40 people marching last night.
Wow,
that's about it.
Yeah, huh?
Yeah, they were out after curfew, just getting arrested. So
damn. Yeah, that's fucking stupid. We had a curfew here. I did not respect it at all, but there's nowhere to go. Like, I don't live in like a city where you can like go to a park and like hang out. Like, what are they going to pull me over after midnight because I'm driving to a gas station?
It could be a big resistance thing, but it's like, I'm a homebody. I like to stay at home and get home. I'm like, fuck, I wish I wanted to go out and just disobey, but I just didn't have it in me. I was like, I'd rather just leave and live somewhere warm.
Yeah. I remember having that same feeling like back in 2012 with the Occupy Wall Street. Like they were all like protesting on the green. And I'm like, this is cool, but I don't want to like sleep in a tent in the middle of the city. Like, I'm just going to go home and like, you know, I didn't like go with that whole thing. And I'm glad I didn't, because it ended up being definitely controlled opposition for sure. But
okay, yeah. So the one question I feel like people will be jumping through the screen and is I asked who the Antichrist.
Yeah.
So Elon Musk.
Well, you know,
he makes sense.
I hate to be like a wet blanket on this, but the whole idea of the Antichrist comes from Nostradamus, and Nostradamus was kind of a fucking nut job. And also, like, a lot of the literature that was written about him was written by other nut jobs. So it's like a really like nutty bowl of soup. Like, and I don't pretend to like think that there was anything like historically accurate about that. So, you know, and that goes to my point again about Napoleon Bonaparte, because they say that Napoleon was one of the antichrists in that whole scheme. It's like Napoleon, then Hitler. And, you know, Hitler makes sense. When you hear that, you're like, oh, okay, of course he was a antichrist. But like, you know, that there's going to be a third one on the way. Like, I don't know, Charles Manson, like Trudeau, like, I don't know, you know, like there's definitely
The whole chip in the head thing is like the main argument for Elon, right?
Well, you know, the mark of the beast in the Bible, again, not the biggest fan of the historical Christianity, but I think there's a lot of value in the Bible. And it's interesting. I was just doing some research on lithium and how they're going to use lithium in these brain chips. And this Bible quote sounds almost like lithium poisoning. They're like, they'll be given the mark of the beast and boils will begin to fester under the skin. And through those boils, demons will, you know, sow their seeds and be born inside of a human or something to that effect, right? And it just sounds really weird in conjunction with the lithium brain chips, because lithium has that kind of caustic, acidic effect on your body if it goes into your skin. You know, it's not totally incompatible with your biology, but it can cause those symptoms I read, like boils and whatnot. So the fact that it says that in the Bible, and then that also matches up with what we, you know, it's consistency, right? I think that's an indicator of something. I don't know. I'm certainly not going to get it. So hopefully that means my soul goes on and I get incarnated into a new person one day and in the future Matrix. So I'll be even more fucked and more trapped. But yeah.
Well, I was making like way back when this was all first starting, I was like melting down. I was like, can you stop with like prepping us with these like jabs and just put the chip right in my fucking head already? You know, because you figure the people who are getting like, oh yeah, I trust Big Pharma, and like now they're just, and those are going to be the first people to get a chip in their head for sure.
And the gamers too, as soon as they find out that they can like, you know, use this to level up in their games, or, you know, that augmented reality that they're falling in love with, like that's all hand in hand with the Oculus stuff. You know, it's just, I mean, it's only a matter of time before they have a contact lens that shows you, you know, your social media notifications, like right there in front of your face, you know?
And the craziest thing is like, man, I'm so excited because I never talk to someone who knows so much shit, but you watch the conditioning. And if you watch like a lot of the movies that were coming out 2, 3, 4 years ago were like high resolution, augmented reality. Like I forget what movie it was like.
Ready Player One.
Yeah, Ready Player. Like I was like, oh, this is an amazing movie. But now you look at it like, holy shit, this is just literally conditioning.
Right.
So it's just crazy how good they are, the elites, at conditioning the masses.
And when we say the elites, you know, again, it goes back to that like simplification. Everybody wants a simple answer. And sadly, that would just lead to a simple conclusion. And these people don't want simple, you know, they don't want to be messed with. And, you know, they go through great lengths to make sure that their plans go untouched, right? So they're never simple. I think that's like one of the big pitfalls with conspiratorial thinking is like, it has to be the Freemasons, because that seems like a simple conclusion. But with the movie thing, it's like, you know, think about the idea of I mean, you're a guy who has cameras. I know, you know how expensive some good quality cameras are. Like there's a lot of hoops you have to jump through to become a director, to make a movie in general. You know, you need a lot of funding. So I think what happens is yes, like there are artistic people who make movies and whatnot, but for the most part, there are sort of like this group maybe of connected, we'll say, directors who get scripts from the CIA or get scripts from the NSA or whoever is putting out these scripts that say like, hey, this is where the trends are, you know, and they might not realize that what they're getting is propagandized. They are just thinking like, oh, these guys are in the know. This is a government agency, you know, and they're only gonna fund my movie project if I go with this because, you know, the projected trends of what people are interested in. It's kind of like a reverse thing, you know, and the director might think that they're like, oh, well, this is what people are into. This is what we need to make the film about. But it works in that reverse way where people are like kind of then programmed predictively to live in this new world that's being created with those trend trackers, which is really just a synonym for, you know, government agency that creates predictive programming propaganda. You know, it's
and it's like, that's not even a crazy argument, because if you look at like the 60s and all the bands coming out,
right,
like the CIA was heavily involved with those. So
right,
to not think that they're heavily involved in Hollywood and the predictive programming that gets shot through that. I mean, I was listening to a podcast with Disney the other day too, just like the magical shit he was putting out, and it's actually insane.
Well, and there's something to that with the occult, you know, milieu. When you use that as your motif for your movie or your story, doesn't mean you're evil. You know, it means you're trying. It's kind of like why George Lucas based Star Wars off of the hero's journey, because there's something archetypical about certain symbols that resonate with us on a subconscious level. And, you know, for lack of a creativity, maybe certain creative types go for those impressions because it adds power. It adds like momentum to your artwork. And it isn't uncreative. I think it's like putting your take on the myths, right? So Disney, when he makes like some kind of film that has occult symbolism in it, it's almost like his take on the myth. And yes, that myth has some momentum to it. It might have some predictive programming mixed in as well, but I don't know if it's so much like that Disney's like casting spells. When you look at the like, you know, weird stuff with like the penises in the Little Mermaid, and like it says sex in the sky in the Lion King film or the Lion King cartoon, you know, that's shady. That's weird. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about like Fantasia, like one of the first visual sort of movies that Disney put out. You know, it's not necessarily that they're trying to put someone under a spell because they're evil and they're, you know, casting a spell. They are casting a spell, but it's more for like commercialistic reasons. Like, how can we sell the most tickets, Jack? You know, in that like 1950s. Yeah. Well, I heard that Houdini had these special tricks, you know, and so it just seems like Mad Men kind of like, well, what's gonna work, you know, and that led to them fusing all this occult symbol into the early movie industry, because that's what was really popular in the 1800s with the spiritualism and the theosophy and the Freemasons and all these different groups that had these sort of links to ancient culture with the myths and the occult and all that stuff.
Okay, and so another question I have, just moving on, I'm just going to hammer questions at you.
I love it.
If you were to relate this time to any time in history, what would you say is the best match?
So I think, you know, we're in like the Kali Yuga is what it's called. And something that I learned about is like the cycles of time goes like lead to bronze to silver to gold, right? Either in that order or reversed. So I would say we're kind of in that lead age that leads to gold, you know, like, because it kind of goes from gold, silver, right? Then lead. So it's like a de-evolution, and then that lead gets transmuted into gold. So, you know, I don't know if that's going to make sense to anyone who doesn't know alchemy stuff, but I think we're in a time where the worst is about to happen, but it's going to make way for something better than we've experienced. Because you got to keep in mind, we're coming out of the age of Pisces, the age of duality, the age of sort of like the yin yang behind me, right? And we're heading into the
Pisces, so that's
really okay. Well, I'm a Pisces rising, so there's a little connection between us. But yeah, the Piscean energy is kind of a dualistic energy, and now that we're heading into the Aquarian age, where Aquarius is symbolized by like the water pourer, kind of feels like water is an analogy or a metaphor for like information, like the interconnectedness of everything. And when we pour that water into, let's say, an area that needs water, all the dirt, the mud, it gets raised to the surface, all those things that were hidden come to the surface, and that's kind of like what's happening right now in our times. It's like this water is being poured on everybody collectively in the consciousness, and that's the internet. And we're seeing like all the worst is getting like sifted up to the top, but then it kind of like settles down and the water becomes clear again, right? So I know that's not answering your question the way you might have expected, but that's the best.
I like it.
That's the best I could do.
Yeah. So I don't know if you ever saw this, but it was like Jesse Ventura doing some conspiracy show, and he had this doctor fly in from Panama, and she left because she was talking about some mass calling. I don't know if you've seen this clip, but it got taken off of all the major networks, and you have to like look on like BitChute. But she talks about it.
This is when Jesse did that TV show, right?
Yeah. And this doctor is basically just like she said she was working for one of the high ups in the government, and this person looked at them and she's like, oh, like the mass calling is coming, and this was back in like 2011, and so this doctor just left and moved to Panama because she was worried about the calling and it coming through a vaccination and stuff. So if you watch this clip, you'll get a better understanding. But do you believe in your heart of hearts that we are in the middle of mass calling?
Yeah, and I'll say that because, like I said towards the beginning, living near New Haven, Yale University, I've met a lot of those doctor, surgeon, medical people types. And again, this is a huge stereotype. I've run into some of these like clinical type people who just have this sort of cold approach to their job, where like the empathy that you might expect from their position is like gone, So that to me, it just felt robotic, meeting people like that. And those are the people that are moving in lockstep with this thing. And it doesn't surprise me that was going on in 2009, because this is a long-term plan. I remember I think sophomore year of high school, we got an extra 2 weeks off of spring break because of the H1N1 swine flu thing. And everybody like was just like, what the hell is swine flu? Like we were all making jokes, and like one like kid got it, but that kid was sick all the time anyways, like that was like the weird kid who didn't even come to regular classes, So it was just like, I saw this coming, like where they were pushing this sort of narrative really slowly and in spurts, sporadically, so that they kind of prepped us for what we're in now. Because I think what happened over the past 10 years is you'd have like certain people get pushed towards that hypochondriac germ sort of theory mindset and to extremes, so that when this came along, there are already a bunch of people who had kind of like role played this scenario in their mind. So they, fit right into place in this new narrative of the COVID pandemic world, like that health inspector I was sort of given an anecdote about at the farmer's market. That was in 2019. None of us what COVID was back then. We had heard of like all the other ones, swine flu and bird flu and all the other things that were supposed to be deadly pandemics that would kill everyone. But it was kind of taken as a joke because like, only really people who weren't taking care of their health in the first place would fall victim to something like that, right? So it's like somebody like myself who tries to maintain like a healthy diet and a healthy, positive mindset. I never felt afraid of anything like that. Just germ theory or terrain theory. I didn't even realize there was a difference. I just thought, instinctively, oh, I don't need to worry about that. I'm a healthy person, but there are some people who just don't have that. Unfortunately, they do not have that, and they bow down to medical authority, and sadly, there are people in my family who are very sick, like my grandfather's had cancer multiple times. And if he had only smoked a joint with me, maybe he would feel a little better, but he's so against marijuana that he'd rather get radiation to fix his cancer, so,
Right.
so I think they've been setting the table for this for many, many, many decades.
You do believe that this is like legit mass?
Well, it could be, but it's also like what I joked about with the survival of the fittest thing. Like they want to, it's eugenicism, they want to create a world where it's more homogenized. They want people to be less diverse. And that's what's so strange about all this diversity stuff that they're pushing in the media. It's almost like they're trying to subvert people away from that type of thinking, because at the same time that, a literal eugenics program is being pushed on every single person, they're also saying how we need to be more inclusive and we need to make sure that the minorities get the vaccine. And it's like this interesting, like double speak, and
Right.
I think the truth is that if anything, people who are not white have the most to lose. And sadly, I'm just a white guy talking about it, so I don't expect them to listen to me. But that's what it looks like to me, quite honestly. And I hope I don't offend anybody with that, because it comes from the bottom of my heart. But the truth is that there are people in the 19th and 20th century who went on record saying that white people, and these are rich people too. These aren't just like whack jobs like in the KKK. They want you to think that that's what white supremacy is.
They were like the heads of Planned Parenthood, and
these are wealthy industrial, CEOs and founders of big groups and organizations, movers and shakers, as they said in the early 1900s. These people were all eugenicists, and they were all part of this sort of racist ideology that, white people were superior to every other race. And they even had this bogus science of phrenology that showed you like, oh, well, see how big a white person's skull is compared to, this person. That must mean that our breed.
It made a name of someone who was in that.
A name of somebody who was a part of Genesis?
Yeah. Wasn't Bill Gates' dad like in it? Wasn't he?
Well, I don't know all these names off the top of my head, but I can say like Charles Darwin was definitely a part of it. Like that whole.
Right.
Let me Google it. I'll go on the spot. I mean, I just don't have it off the top of my head.
I know Sam always talks about specific people. I'm just trying to remember like some of the names, because I know you are right. Like they're like you hear some of the names, you're like, holy fuck.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like eugenics is considered discrimination, and it's literally what the vaccines are, while everybody is saying, oh, we need to end discrimination. Police are discriminating. It's just bullshit. But I mean, yeah, Bill Gates is definitely connected. Let's see. Here we go. 21 historical supporters of eugenics that may shock you. We got a list. We got a list here, Luke. Don't worry. Oh, it's one of these weird websites where you have to click the arrows to see.
Well, we don't need, like, I know for fact Bill Gates, I think he was like, his dad was heavy into it. So,
right. Well, we got Theodore Roosevelt, Alexander Graham Bell, Helen Keller, Winston Churchill, Margaret Sanger, W.E.B. Du Bois, who is a African-American person, keep in mind, Clarence Darrow, George Bernard Shaw, Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jacques Cousteau. What? I like Jacques Cousteau. John Harvey Kellogg. Plato was a eugenicist. William Beveridge. William Beveridge. Did they name the beverage after this guy?
And what is eugenics to its core?
It's the idea that one group of human beings is superior to another, and that they would, exterminate or select for the best human beings. It's just
It's just
an attempt
Yeah.
at scientifically justifying racism. That's what it is.
yeah. See how stupid that is, though. Like the only reason your pigment changes is just where you are on the globe for
Right.
like thousands of years, and that's it. Like it really is that easy.
Right.
So stupid.
Well, we both have red hair. Mine's harder to notice, but we both have red hair, so I don't know where that says we're from. But yeah, you're absolutely right. It's all it is a geographic indication.
It's like literally nuts. These people have lost their minds. Well, okay. I'm just gonna kind of like read through this list of extra stuff I had here.
Let's get it.
Have you heard about China creating a fake sun? And there's a news article going around. They just lit it up, and it was like 5 times as powerful as the normal sun. Have you seen that?
Oh,
Yeah, it's creating a fake sun in China.
so
let me
they're going to have like an extra growing season now.
I guess that's what they're going for.
They're never going to have winter ever again in China.
Okay, and to kind of go off of that, do you think that these countries really act as individual countries, or do you think they're a lot more connected than we think? Like, I get that China's a communist country, same with Russia, the US is capitalist, but do you actually think at the end of the day, like, they're a lot more intertwined and do a lot more to benefit the leaders of each one than we think?
Yeah, I absolutely think that. I think there are, to the point we were making before about the Freemasons, there are groups within groups within groups, and that like center group that's really controlling the way the other two groups on the outside portion of the diagram operate. That inner circle is always way, way ahead of the rest of us. So they're not limited to borders. They're not limited to countries. That's just how they keep us in line. So no, I don't think it's that simple. I think what's a good indication of that is, the Bush's relationship with China. Like you saw, George Bush Sr. was the ambassador of China. He was also in the CIA. So, and then he was the president of the United States. Then his son was the president of the United States when 9/11 happened. So,
And now their son's great friends with Ellen, so that's good.
yeah, and he's a painter too. So check out his cute art.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, they're all scumbags on the inner circles. It's the same games they've been playing since they told us that they had the divine right to rule. The kings of Babylon were chosen by the gods. It's that same thing. It's the bloodline. And, China has their own game too, because they have dynasties. They have, groups that have existed in the shadows, like what is their gang? The Triads is kind of like a prototypical CIA group. So I don't think that it's limited to country. I think, like, if anything, the smaller countries with the most resources kind of get bullied the most. And then, like, other countries kind of, like, realize the game and try to fall in line. You just shared that link with me. Let me see.
Yeah. Hot to straw. China fires a artificial sun 7 times warmer than the real sun to make unlimited energy and wants to make it hotter.
Well, I love that this comes from the sun.com. Is this from the Phoenix region? Damn. I was expecting this to be like a satellite. How do they expect to do this from the ground?
I have no clue.
It looks like a big vat. Like,
Yeah.
it looks like they're going to be brewing beer in this thing. Very interesting.
It
Okay.
reminds me of, like, I don't know if you've seen Talladega Nights when Ricky Bobby's like, they just put a fake heart in some guy from China. Did he live? No. But I figure technology, I'll be able to live 300 years old. Like, okay, it's like cool. They can make a fake sun in some vat thing, but it's like, how far away are we actually from harnessing a fake sun?
Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what this thing's supposed to do, but yeah, wow, that's crazy. I mean, Tesla built the Wardenclyffe Tower, and I just found out last night that it's like literally right across Long Island Sound from where I grew up. So I don't know if that affects me at all, but I'm probably like absorbing some kind of weird military radio frequency.
Oh yeah, you get that DARPA technology shot in you.
Yeah. But no,
So-
that's really interesting. Thanks for showing me this.
To go off of that, I don't know. I wanted to do this before the episode, but I just couldn't push myself to do it because the movie probably fucking sucks. But remember The Unfortunate Truth?
The movie?
That,
No.
it was, how old are you? You're 27?
Mhm.
Yeah, you're my age. So when we were in high school, I remember in science class, there was the movie The Unfortunate Truth, and it was like a documentary about climate change, and it was made by the guy who ran against Bush. What's his name?
Oh, Al Gore.
Al Gore.
Yeah.
Yeah. And basically, he just makes predictions about where the climate's going to be by like 2020.
Here we are.
Yeah. I think one of them was literally like 10% of Florida would be underwater, like just some, and like so a lot of the mountains he referenced wouldn't have like snow on them anymore. But this is like, I'm not denying climate change, you know, like I'm not saying like humans haven't fucked up the earth, but I think like a lot of the grand things like we're causing more hurricanes and shit, like to me that's just a bit far-fetched. Like the fact that we're polluting and overfishing the ocean, yeah, that's true, most likely. But like to think that like humans are causing bigger cyclones and shit, and knowing that like DARPA it is a major player in like engineering weather, like, and that's just a thing like most people don't know. And like I remember watching Tinfoil Hat, and the one thing that was shocking to me was the fact that like the head of the CIA basically admitted that they're purposely spreading chemtrails around to control the weather. Whereas like most people don't even know that that's like a dialogue going on, but it's like they're just openly admitting it,
Right.
you know?
Right. Yeah. And I mean, to what I was mentioning before about the Wardenclyffe Tower, they were figuring out how to cause earthquakes with that technology that Tesla was tapping into. So if they could start an earthquake, if they could start a hurricane or a tsunami, that would explain a lot. I mean, look at what happened to Japan with their whole nuclear reactor that they had there, you know?
Yeah.
I mean, who knows? That could have been a covert attack. Maybe somebody in certain government wasn't happy with Japan having that, China, and then they caused that to happen, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's crazy to think about that. The technology is like, what level of technology do these governments have that we're just not aware of, you know?
Well, and that brings me to mention the books I've been looking into by Walter Bosley, because he talks about how they used to have these Zeppelins, actually like the one on that little like sign right there, the Zeppelin. Here, let me grab it.
Okay.
Zeppelins, you know, they were saying basically how they were invented in the 1840s or something like that. So by 1940s, when Roswell happened, they could have evolved that technology from that huge Zeppelin to a tiny little flying saucer. And Walter talks about how it's this whole group of Germans that lived in America who were building this technology, and they're like a breakaway civilization completely outside of mainstream technology. And with that in mind, considering that happened before the Nazis, it's like, maybe that's how the Nazis went and escaped after World War II, because they had all these weird breakaway civilizations of Germans in South America that they were able to just go and hide away within, you know?
Right.
So really strange stuff. And I talked to another guy named Chaz who actually went to South America researching, you know, old Nazi bases and whatnot. And this story of this group called the Friendship that is like a weird sort of seemingly alien, seemingly maybe even neo-Nazi like group of people who live off the island, this island off the coast of Chile, right? So they're like strange breakaway civilizations out there that just aren't connected with the rest of the world. So what kind of technology do you need to even, you know, be out there outside of trade and like, obviously you can get, food, right? Conceivably, anybody could do that self-sufficiently in the right environment, but things like platinum that these people have, like how are you mining huge amounts of platinum if you don't have like modern technology,
Right. Yeah.
So
So do you,
questions.
ton of questions. I'm full of them too. So do you believe that the US has like a ton of underground bases and like places where like elites hide and do things? Like I don't even know how to properly word the question, because it could be such a mixture of different people that are using these like hideouts and testing facilities and
Yeah.
like, do you believe that that's happening?
Yeah. Well, you said you drove your Mazda from Canada to Florida, right?
Well, yeah, I had it shipped. I didn't drive it.
Oh, okay. I was gonna say, because then you might have gone through the Appalachian Mountains if you did, but there are a bunch of underground bases in like Virginia and North Carolina, South Carolina, all like within, hours helicopter from Washington, D.C., So yeah, there's a lot of strange military bases in those states in the Appalachian Mountains. I think anywhere where there's mountain ranges, you'll have these weird military bases that have like, secret doors that look like the side of a mountain and, trucks. There's stories of hikers like seeing trucks drive, on this weird road that they didn't even see because it's so remote. And then they like all park and then go into the side of a mountain and then like the mountain closes, right? So there's definitely weird stories of underground bases where the military is concerned. And even like, we know like, I think it's Black Mountain or something they call it, or Iron Mountain. And that's where they have this big like place for the president. If anything ever happened to the White House, the president apparently can drive underground in Washington, D.C. to this tunnel that'll take him to another tunnel that'll then take him to this like mountain underground base in, 20, 30 miles outside of D.C. So there's a lot of rumors about stuff like that. In my own area, Yale University has an extensive tunnel system under the city of New Haven. And, a lot of the Tartaria researcher people talk about underground structures because of the whole mud flood thing. And I think it's interesting, but really what I heard was they built these tunnels in the 1800s because they just didn't have like what we have now to move snow. So when it snowed, people were fucked. Like they didn't have,
Right.
big plastic shovels or plows and things like that. So instead of, trudging through the snow in the winter, a place like Yale University would make like underground tunnels for their students to go from building to building in the winter. Now they don't really use them for that anymore because we have those snow plows and whatnot, but they're still there. And one of my friends, my mentor, Amos, who taught me all this conspiracy, spiritual Native American stuff, told me that there were tunnels underneath the city that homeless people got kidnapped into, and then they would be taken into the medical sort of realm of Yale University and experimented on. So yeah, there's definitely rumors of that kind of strange shit going on underground. Yeah.
Holy fuck. Well, that leads me to a crazy talking point that I hate referencing Alex Jones, but I watch him a lot. So
No worries.
it's the one thing he always mentions is human animal chimera research that these, I don't know what it is. Like, I don't know if it's governments doing this research but the reason he said they're doing it is because there's mechanisms that protect harmful research on animals, and there's mechanisms that protect harmful research on humans, but there's no mechanisms to protect something that's half human, half animal, or a percentage human and a percentage animal, right? So he's saying that, I don't know how much you know about this either, but he's saying that these elites are basically like doing research on clones of themselves and keeping like these like 99.9% humans and then 0.1% monkey chimp in like rooms underground and doing research or like harvesting their organs, kind of like that movie The Island.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah, that sounds like Dr. Moreau's like evil evil lab, you know. Geez, yeah. I mean, I don't know how that would help, you know, like, because even though we are so genetically close to apes, I still don't think that their organs would be compatible with ours, but
Maybe it's not necessarily for the, or maybe they're just like running tests. I don't know. I'm just bringing it up because
well, I think the idea of, like, you know, man as a creator is a really strong, like, theme throughout the occult. And, you know, what I think that goes back to is the fact that we were created somehow, you know, whether you believe in a all powerful, omnipotent creator God, or you believe in, like, you know, some ancient species that was above us that, you know, modified our genetics to create what we are now. There is this kind of like mystery regarding our DNA, our evolution, and that's where the whole creation versus evolution thing hinges. Personally, I'm not a creationist the same way someone who believes in the Bible is, but I definitely think that there is a creative force in the universe that most likely is intelligent and all that stuff. So with that in mind, I think we as human beings try to embody that. That's our highest potential, to be like the creator. So maybe these ultra rich, hyper elite people are just doing that, where they think of themselves as like the Anunnaki gods compared to the rest of us. So they want to make their own worker species, you know, slave species, and, you know, karmically feel like they're not going to be in debt because, you know, the laws don't apply to a human hybrid, which sounds sick and like Dr. Frankenstein-ish, you know, like that's what the whole Dr. Frankenstein book is about, is like creating this, like, you know, homunculus to do your will. And then the homunculus ends up kind of having a heart, and like that brings the human component into it, and everybody cries and says, yay, Mr. Frankenstein needs a wife. And then Dr. Frankenstein's wife is born, and she's a nightmare.
Oh, well, I want to thank you so much. It's been like almost an hour 50, but I want to end on this last question. Hopefully you could come back on at some point. I was so much fun. And I don't know if I'm on your podcast, but
well, there was a little bit of a confusion there, but I'd love to do it as a swap cast, because I know you do shorter episodes. So you could, I mean, I'll put it out on my end. If you want to put it out on your end, that'd be awesome. We'll just
I totally down for that.
Cool.
Yeah, let's do it, baby.
Right.
Well, you're recording it all. Technically, it's yours.
Well, yeah. Tell me, what's your last question?
Pindar.
Oh, Pindar.
Is that real? Explain. Okay, so you have to understand, the people who listen to mine have no idea of any. I kind of understand loosely when you go into like Tartaria and stuff, but the people who listen to mine are going to be like, what the hell is Tartaria? So when you explain, like, I'm always going to have to have you back like once a year and just explain what these individual things are. But
oh yeah, well, this was more like us getting to know each other, and I really appreciate it. I like doing this, but I think if you do want to do that, I would love to have a conversation with you where it's a little more structured, so I can like prepare what you want me to talk about, because off the top of my head I'm kind of like mixing shit up, and you know,
yeah,
I'd like to prepare, but this has been fun, dude. I appreciate it.
I almost feel like that it's like I'm just like a young Jedi, and you're just like shooting
Padawan.
Yeah, but it's crazy, like just how much you know, which is always nice to have someone like listening and responding who actually is pretty well rehearsed on like a wide spectrum of this information. So, but to get to it, Pindar. What do you think this thing's real? And what does that kind of like tie into with regard to like this whole lizard ideology that it like kind of consumes people within the conspiracy world?
Right. So I definitely think reptilians are real. Going back to my mentor, Amos, he had a peyote experience where he was in touch with a reptilian being. But I jumped to my phone real quick because this guy on Instagram sent me this really strange series of photos, and he was like, look, bro, it's Pindar. And at first I'm like, whatever, you know, this is stupid. And then I looked, and there are actual like gold statues of this, like, yeah, it's in Mexico, and it's called,
Of course.
yeah, oh no, I'm sorry, it's in Peru, and it's called Chiclayo, Peru, and there are these really strange statues there. I wish it wasn't on Instagram, because then I would screen share this, but it's this gold.
Just hold it up to your webcam.
Yeah, this golden, like, see this guy, right? It's terrible.
Yeah. That's okay. I get it.
Oh, here's a good one. So yeah, these weird pictures of like reptilian statues in a public square.
Like oh my God.
So-
Holy shit.
So that's in Peru, right?
That's in Peru.
That's in Peru, and that's supposed to be like their ancient history too. Like, that's not like for a movie or something. That's like,
Oh my God.
mythological figure in Peru. So Pindar, I think, is legit. I think there's some sort of reptilian species, whether it's multidimensional and then they're able to like phase into this dimension and then phase out of this dimension. That seems to be where my suspicions are. But they also could be like an underground race of beings that only lives in caves and stuff. I mean, we hear stories of Sasquatch and goblins and all kinds of other things coming out of caves. So yeah, Pindar, I think my guess is he's real.
And just so people on my end understand, he's like a 7-foot tall albino lizard that kind of like is at the top of the pecking order as far as like running the world. Is that what you understand?
Well, that's how he's described to some people. I don't know where that comes from, and I'd love to research that further, but I know there's like there's like a couple different areas where that could have come from. It sounds to me like that comes out of like the whole Nazi occult zeitgeist of ideas, because they talked about that, like meeting some sort of reptilian lizard in Tibet who was like the Great White Brotherhood leader. And so I don't buy into this stuff completely, but I also think that, you know, to that point, it could be multidimensional. Like, these beings phase into our reality. I was just on a show last night, and this guy, Mike Winner from the AlphaCast podcast, popped in towards the end, and he was talking about Saint Germain and how Saint Germain appears in people's lives, and he's not like a demon or something weird like that. It's just like another type of being that is able to navigate multiple dimensions. I mean, how other ways to explain it? I don't know. I've never experienced it, but I'm hoping to. But I hope your audience is still listening and not totally blown away.
One that I'll kind of like lead into this, and then I don't know how much longer you want to go, but the craziest thing I heard with regard to this reptilian stuff was, I forget, it was like Princess Diana had a friend that had witnessed the royal family like morphing into reptilians and eating like sacrificial children stuff. And this was like recorded. I don't know if I heard the actual audio, but these researchers said like one of her friends was told this, and that's kind of possibly why she was murdered, because she knew too much.
Right. And that whole death was extremely suspicious in that tunnel, and you know, the person that she was engaged with was also you know, they kind of pinned it on him possibly, but no, I think that story holds water. There was definitely some weird stuff going on with the Royal British, but that's a whole nother topic, brother. I appreciate this. I like talking to you. I think we ought to do this again soon. This has been fun, brother. Tell the folks who listen on my end where to find
Luke Mitchell Comedy on Instagram, and then I prefer just subscribe to my YouTube, Luke Mitchell's Traveling Circus. I was making sketches, but then I fled Canada, so now I'm just a nomad. And then I started a financial channel on YouTube as well called Stocky Talkie. So that's kind of picking up steam. But as far as just podcasting, Luke Mitchell's Circus.
Right on. I cut you off. Were you going to say something? My bad.
No.
Oh,
that's it.
okay.
Yeah, Luke Mitchell Comedy on Instagram, and I had a link tree in there. That's probably the easiest place. I haven't spread out to like Rumble yet, but I probably should.
Well, I appreciate you being here, and I appreciate you having me on your show. We can make this a swapcast. So if those of your audience haven't heard of me before, myfamilythinksimcrazy.com is the place to go. And yeah, bro, good shit, man. This is fun.
Thank you. Thank you for accepting the request.
Oh, no. Thank you. All right, ladies and gentlemen, welcome back. Thank you for sticking with us to the end here. Luke Mitchell, what a guy. Be sure to check out Luke Mitchell's Circus on YouTube. Also check out his podcast, The Luke Mitchell Show. Almost certain that this episode might have already aired by now on his feed, so you may be here from that show listening to this. I put my own spin on everything, so I don't think Luke's going to use the interlude and whatnot, but funny stuff, played around with his words there. That was not his actual quote at the beginning, as you might have told or learned. But anyways, here we are, much later than when this conversation actually took place. I don't know if this also made it past the cutting room floor, but I woke up late that morning for whatever reason, and I was late for my interview with Luke. So unfortunately, there's a little bit of time lapse in my mind, and then I didn't really remember whether Luke was coming on my show or whether I was a guest on his show, so it was kind of a mix between both of us hosting, but it was cool. Luke saved the day at the end there and asked a bunch of really smart questions, so I think he's on his way to having a fantastic podcast. This is like episode 21 of his podcast, and episode 126 of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast. We have a new patron. Shout out to Donut from the Donut Factory. He will be joining us on the show very soon. That episode is out. If you're a Patreon or Rockfin supporter, you might have already watched that conversation between Donut and I. Audio listeners, don't worry. The free version of the show will be out soon. But we got to give Donut a spirit animal name because he signed up for the Patreon. Thank you so much, Donut. I appreciate it, bro. So let's go ahead and give Donut a very unique, original spirit animal name right here, right now. Okay, drawing from the cards in the same random fashion that I always do. Ooh, this one we never see. All right, very cool. I love it. All right. So, Donut, your spirit animal name is the Great Smoking Cheetah. You got the Great Smoking Mirror card and the Cheetah card. Now, the Great Smoking Mirror card represents reflections, which was cool because we definitely reflected on Donut's life in that episode. So, shout out to you, Donut. Thank you for joining, and thank you for being the Great Smoking Cheetah. Anyways, here we are in the outro. This one's going to be short, folks. Had a lot of interviews recorded this week. I have to definitely unplug for a few days. I don't know when that'll happen, but it's coming. And it's cool because even though it's cold and it can't really go outside up here in the wild north, I got plenty of books to keep me company. A new one just came in the mail. I'm looking forward to having this gentleman on the show, author Brian Cotnoir, who I think recently was on the Higher Side Chats. That's how I found out about him, either there or from Aeon Byte. But his book, Practical Alchemy, came in the mail. So I'm going to be looking through that soon. You might have noticed on the last episode of the My Family Thinks I'm Crazy podcast with Loomis, we put an episode of The Library of the Mystagogue at the end of the episode. And that's what I do on the Patreon. So many people were asking me about book recommendations that I thought, you know what? Let's add an element of synchronicity to the list. Because now if you listen to that show, maybe you'll come across one of those books in a used bookstore. Maybe you'll get turned on to a subject that you didn't even know existed, and you go out and you'll buy the book online. Wait, like I do. Either way, used bookstores. I think I got to get out to one soon, but a lot of cool things going on. Obviously, we have the artwork that we're selling now, but we also have merch. So you can get some handmade jewelry made by yours truly. And then finally, we have merch. We're doing a merch raffle to kick off our merch. So if you sign up for the Patreon before our monthly Telegram meeting on the 17th for patrons only, you can join in and be a part of this raffle. We're going to raffle off 3, maybe 2. I don't know. One of them I might keep. We're going to raffle off these t-shirts, and you know what? We'll do 3. We'll get rid of all 3 of them. Raffle off these handmade t-shirts printed by me. I have all the equipment. I know how to do prints and whatnot. But not only that, we also have some really cool merch. Shout out to some artists who have answered the call. I put out the call, hey, can somebody make some art for the show? And someone by the name of, Starving Artwork on Instagram. Shout out to Starving Artwork. He made some really cool designs. Our government is shady, and then the Synchro Mystic design that I liked. So those are now available as merch. Get them on a t-shirt. There's a whole variety of t-shirts there in our little Teespring merch store. So go into the episode descriptions and check out the merch. All shapes and sizes, women, men. We got it all there. And then we also have the artwork for the show on a mug and on a t-shirt. And we have some really cool art in the works. I'm not going to shout this person out yet because it's not final, but seems pretty damn near close. I saw what they were working on. It looks great. But we still need more artwork. So please don't hesitate. If you're an artist and you listen to this show while you're drawing, and you listen to the show while you're painting, you listen to the show while you're doing art on your computer, whatever it is, get in touch with me. Let me know. Maybe your skills gel with what we need, and maybe you can capture the essence of the show in some art that we can sell on a t-shirt. And I will definitely compensate you for your time. This is a value for value model of a podcast, and if you even want to send us the art for free as a way to support the show, that is more than welcome too, and we're happy to give you a shout out as well. So thank you so much for listening here, folks. Like I said, it's a short one today. You know where to go to support us. MyFamilyThinksI'mCrazy.com has all the links to everything mentioned, even our sponsors. They're all there right in the episode description. MyFamilyThinksI'mCrazy.com is another place, obviously. And then Alt Media United. You can go there, check out all the podcasts we have in the cooperative. And if you're listening to the show and you're out there and you have a YouTube channel, maybe you have a podcast, you have something going on, Odyssey, BitChute, get in touch with me. You'll join the cooperative and be a part of the community. All right, looking forward to the next episode, and have a great moment wherever you are in the now. Peace.